At 17 minutes and 20 seconds past 5 on January 21st, 1969, automatic safety systems screamed a warning deep beneath the Swiss Alps. Inside, a reinforced cavern carved from solid rock, radiation detectors registered levels that would kill a human in less than an hour. The experimental nuclear reactor at Lucens had just suffered Switzerland's worst atomic accident. But the operators didn't know their reactor was already dying. Before we dive in, please consider dropping a like and subscribing. The story begins 3 months earlier, October 24th, 1968. Maintenance crews at the Lucens experimental reactor were performing routine work on the cooling system's carbon dioxide blowers. These massive fans circulated gas through the reactor core at 50 times atmospheric pressure. The blowers used water-lubricated mechanical seals. Those seals failed. Water began seeping where it should never go. Drop by drop, it infiltrated the pressurized carbon dioxide circuit. The operators knew about the leak. They documented it. They planned to fix it later. The reactor kept running. December 11th, 1968. Engineers conducted a blower test, driving the accumulated water deeper into the system. The contaminated coolant flowed directly into fuel channel 59, where uranium rods sat wrapped in magnesium alloy cladding. Water and magnesium don't mix. For 65 days, fuel element 59 sat submerged. The magnesium cladding began to corrode, slowly at first, then faster. Metal dissolved. Debris accumulated. The fine particles settled like sediment, blocking the carbon dioxide flow through the lower section of the fuel assembly. Without proper cooling, the uranium rods began to overheat. January 21st, 1969. 4:23 in the morning. The Lucens reactor reached criticality for what would be the final time. Neutrons split uranium atoms. Heat built. The damaged core began generating power. The operators had no idea they were starting a reactor with a melting fuel assembly. For nearly 13 hours, the crippled reactor climbed toward its rated power. 12 megawatts thermal. Hot carbon dioxide circulated through 73 fuel elements. 72 functioned normally. Element 59 was coming apart. At 17:14, the reactor reached full power. 6 minutes later, contamination detectors triggered an automatic emergency shutdown. The control rods slammed into the core, stopping the nuclear reaction. But it was too late. 2 rapid explosions shook the underground cavern. The pressure tube containing fuel element 59 ruptured like a bursting pipe. Molten uranium, radioactive debris, and 1,100 kilograms of heavy water blasted into the reactor hall. The cavern, filled with a radioactive cloud. 15 minutes of contaminated carbon dioxide and fission products vented directly into the confined space. Radiation levels spiked to 1 sievert per hour, enough to deliver a potentially fatal dose in 60 minutes. The ventilation system had become a pathway for disaster. At 17:58, emergency procedures activated filtered exhaust. 22 minutes later, all ventilation stopped completely. Control room staff donned respirators. Outside, monitoring teams detected only trace increases in radioactivity. The underground location had saved Switzerland from catastrophe. Solid molasse rock contained the contamination, but inside the cavern, every surface was now radioactive. The experimental reactor was destroyed. Switzerland's dream of energy independence had become a nightmare buried in stone. The operators had unknowingly started a reactor that was already dead. The question wasn't why it failed. The question was how a cutting-edge facility could operate for months with a melting core and nobody noticed until it exploded. Switzerland had built its nuclear future on a lie. The Lucens reactor represented more than an experiment. It embodied Swiss technological independence, a domestically designed reactor using Swiss engineering, Swiss uranium, and Swiss ambition. The goal? Prove that a small nation could master the atom without foreign dependency. Energie Ouest Suisse operated the facility. The federal government provided oversight. Everyone believed the design was sound. December 23rd, 1968. Less than a month before the accident, Swiss authorities issued the final operating license for Lucens. The definitive Betriebsbewilligung gave Energie Ouest Suisse permission to run the reactor at full power. The paperwork looked perfect. The inspections were complete. The reactor was ready for commercial demonstration. Nobody mentioned the water leaks. The Lucens design seemed ingenious. Carbon dioxide gas cooled the uranium fuel. Heavy water moderated the nuclear reaction. Natural uranium eliminated the need for expensive enrichment facilities. The entire reactor sat buried in solid rock, providing natural containment. Switzerland called it their Swiss reactor line, a pathway to energy independence that could be exported worldwide. The design had one fatal flaw. Water-lubricated seals protected the high-pressure carbon dioxide circuit. These seals were supposed to prevent contamination. When they failed in October, water began mixing with the reactor coolant. The operators documented the problem. They scheduled repairs. They continued operating. Water kept flowing into fuel channel 59. Magnesium alloy cladding protected the uranium fuel rods. In dry carbon dioxide, magnesium performs perfectly. Exposed to water, it corrodes rapidly. The chemical reaction produces hydrogen gas and magnesium oxide debris. For 65 days, this process continued inside fuel element 59. Metal dissolved. Particles accumulated. The debris acted like a dam, blocking carbon dioxide flow through the lower section of the fuel assembly. Without cooling, the uranium began to melt. January 21st, 1969. The operators started their reactor, believing everything was normal. Power climbed steadily toward 12 megawatts. Temperature readings looked stable across 72 of 73 fuel channels. Channel 59 showed different numbers, but the control room displays didn't highlight the discrepancy. Warning systems weren't sensitive enough to detect the localized overheating. Alarms remained silent. The reactor continued climbing toward full power. At 1714, the reactor reached rated thermal output. Inside fuel element 59, temperatures soared beyond design limits. Magnesium cladding softened. Uranium fuel began melting. 6 minutes later, contamination detectors finally triggered. The automatic scram system slammed control rods into the core, stopping the nuclear chain reaction. But the damaged fuel continued generating decay heat. The melting accelerated. 2 explosions rocked the underground cavern. The pressure tube containing fuel element 59 ruptured catastrophically. Molten debris, radioactive gas, and 1,100 kilograms of heavy water blasted into the reactor hall. Radiation levels spiked to 1 sievert per hour. A human could absorb a potentially lethal dose in 60 minutes. Control room staff activated emergency procedures. Respirators were distributed. Ventilation systems switched to filtered mode, then shut down completely to prevent radioactive releases. Outside the cavern, monitoring teams from Energy West Suisse and the Federal Institute for Reactor Research deployed across the Vaud countryside. They found almost nothing. The underground location had contained the disaster. Solid molasse rock prevented significant radioactive releases. Off-site monitoring detected only minor increases in background radiation. Public doses remained below 1,000th of a millisievert, less than 5% of annual background radiation exposure. Switzerland had avoided a catastrophe by accident of geography. But inside corporate headquarters and government offices, a different crisis was unfolding. The experimental reactor program represented massive investment and national prestige. The accident threatened Switzerland's entire nuclear strategy. Energy West Suisse faced uncomfortable questions. How could a reactor operate for months with a melting fuel assembly? Why didn't warning systems detect the problem earlier? The company's initial response was predictable. Technical malfunction, unforeseeable circumstances, no significant public risk. Switzerland wasn't alone in its nuclear ambitions. Britain, France, and Canada were developing similar reactor designs. Heavy water reactors promised fuel efficiency and operational flexibility, but international competitors weren't suffering partial meltdowns in their experimental facilities. The Lucens accident threatened to derail Swiss nuclear credibility, just as the program gained momentum. Domestic reactor technology suddenly looked unreliable compared to proven American light water designs. The question facing Swiss authorities was stark: continue with domestic technology or abandon the dream of nuclear independence? The answer would reshape Switzerland's energy future for decades. The investigation began before the radiation settled. Andreas F. Fritscher, technical director of the Federal Institute for Reactor Research, led the forensic team. His mission: determine how Switzerland's most advanced nuclear facility had suffered a partial meltdown without anyone noticing until it exploded. The answers would take 10 years to compile. Inside the Lucens cavern, investigators faced massive radioactive contamination. Every surface registered dangerous levels. Equipment was destroyed. The reactor vessel was breached. 1,100 kilograms of heavy water had mixed with molten fuel debris across the floor. The cavern had become a radioactive tomb. Remote cutting equipment carved through contaminated piping. Shielded containers held the most dangerous debris. Workers operated in shifts, limiting radiation exposure. The cleanup would continue for 4 years. Fritzsche's team reconstructed the failure sequence step by step. Water ingress beginning October 24th. Magnesium corrosion accelerating through November and December. Debris accumulation blocking coolant flow. Local overheating in fuel element 59. The timeline was damning. For 65 days, operators had run a reactor with a corroding fuel assembly. Warning signs existed but went unrecognized. Temperature anomalies were logged but not investigated. The system designed to prevent accidents had failed systematically. Energy West Suisse faced mounting pressure. How could a utility company operate a nuclear reactor for months without detecting fuel damage? Why weren't backup safety systems more sensitive? The company's response emphasized technical complexity and unforeseeable circumstances. Seal failures weren't predictable. Water ingress couldn't be prevented. The accident resulted from extreme conditions beyond normal design parameters. Investigators disagreed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're watching from today, and if this story hits you, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next one. The Lucens accident exposed fundamental weaknesses in Swiss reactor technology. While other nations developed light water reactors with proven safety records, Switzerland had pursued an experimental design with untested components. Heavy water reactors promised efficiency. Carbon dioxide cooling offered simplicity. Natural uranium eliminated enrichment costs. But the combination proved fragile. Dismantling the destroyed reactor required innovative techniques. Remote-controlled cutting tools carved through radioactive piping. Specialized containers transported contaminated components. Workers developed new shielding methods for handling molten fuel debris. 72 undamaged fuel elements were shipped to Belgium for reprocessing. The heavy water moderator was decontaminated and sold. Everything else became radioactive waste. The process consumed resources, equivalent to building a new reactor. Internationally, the Lucens accident became a case study in nuclear oversight failures. How could an experimental reactor operate with compromised fuel integrity? Why weren't water ingress problems addressed immediately? The incident highlighted gaps in regulatory authority. Energy West Suisse held the operating license. The Federal Institute provided technical oversight, but responsibility for safety decisions remained unclear. Nobody wanted to be blamed for Switzerland's nuclear disaster. Swiss political leaders faced uncomfortable questions. The government had promoted nuclear energy as a path to independence. Federal authorities had approved the reactor design. Public funds had supported the experimental program. Opposition politicians demanded accountability. Who authorized continued operation after the water leaks? Why weren't more sensitive monitoring systems required? The ruling party emphasized lessons learned and improved oversight. The practical impact was immediate. Switzerland abandoned its domestic reactor program. Future nuclear plants would use proven American light water reactor technology. Besnau, Gösgen, and Liebstadt would rely on imported designs. Energy independence became energy pragmatism. Swiss utilities purchased reactors from Westinghouse and General Electric. The dream of exporting Swiss nuclear technology died in the Lucens cavern. Fritzsche's final report appeared in 1979. 10 years after the accident, investigators delivered their official verdict. Water seal failures caused systematic corrosion, leading to coolant blockage and fuel overheating. The accident was preventable. Better monitoring systems could have detected the water ingress. Immediate shutdown procedures could have prevented fuel damage. More sensitive alarms could have triggered earlier intervention. But the recommendations came too late for Switzerland's nuclear ambitions. The Lucens accident influenced international nuclear regulations. The International Nuclear Event Scale later classified the incident as Level 4, an accident with local consequences. Not as severe as Chernobyl or Fukushima, but significant enough to reshape safety protocols worldwide. Modern reactor designs incorporate lessons learned from Switzerland's underground disaster. By March 1995, the Lucens site was largely declassified. Only a small waste storage facility remained under nuclear oversight. The cavern that once housed Switzerland's nuclear future became a heritage site. In 2003, the final radioactive waste was transported to central storage. The following year, federal authorities released the site from nuclear legislation. The underground chambers where uranium once split atoms now store wine. Switzerland operates 5 nuclear reactors today. All use imported light water technology. All incorporate safety systems that might have prevented the Lucens accident. But the underground cavern near Lucens serves as a permanent reminder. Nuclear power demands respect for both the atom's promise and its peril. The experimental reactor that was supposed to showcase Swiss engineering instead demonstrated the consequences of cutting corners with nuclear technology. Some experiments are too dangerous to fail. 34 years after the accident, the last remnants of Switzerland's nuclear disaster finally left Lucens. September 2003. A convoy of specialized transport vehicles carried 300 tons of radioactive waste 160 kilometers northeast to the Zweilag interim storage facility in Wurenlingen. The final chapter of the Lucens cleanup was closing, but the legacy would endure forever. The waste represented everything that couldn't be decontaminated: concrete from the reactor cavern, piping that had carried radioactive coolant, equipment that had been exposed to the molten fuel debris. Each container was catalogued, monitored, and sealed for permanent storage. Switzerland had learned an expensive lesson about the true cost of nuclear accidents. 2004. The Federal Council officially released the Lucens site from nuclear legislation. After 35 years, the underground cavern was no longer classified as a nuclear facility. The legal transformation was symbolic. Switzerland's first nuclear accident site had become just another piece of real estate, but traces of the disaster remained. 2011. Federal Office of Public Health Scientists detected elevated tritium levels in seepage water near the former reactor site. The radioactive hydrogen isotope was leaking from residual contamination deep in the rock. The levels remained below regulatory limits, but they proved that nuclear accidents leave permanent scars. The International Nuclear Event Scale retroactively classified Lucens as Level 4, an accident with local consequences. Not as severe as Chernobyl's Level 7 catastrophe or Fukushima's widespread contamination, but significant enough to reshape international nuclear safety protocols. Switzerland's underground disaster had become a global case study. Today, Switzerland operates 5 nuclear reactors: Besnau 1 and 2, Gösgen, Liebstadt. All use proven light water reactor technology imported from the United States. None use the experimental heavy water design that failed at Lucens. The dream of Swiss nuclear independence died in that underground cavern. The Lucens site has found new purpose. The underground galleries that once housed uranium fuel assemblies now store wine. The concrete chambers that witnessed Switzerland's worst nuclear accident have become commercial storage space. Visitors can tour the facility. Few realize they're walking through the scene of a partial meltdown. Engineering students worldwide study the Lucens accident. The incident appears in nuclear safety courses and regulatory training programs. The failure sequence, water ingress, corrosion, blockage, overheating, has become a standard example of cascading system failures. Switzerland's disaster teaches future engineers what happens when multiple safeguards fail simultaneously. Lucens lacks the notoriety of Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, or Fukushima. The underground location contained the contamination. No evacuations were required. Public health impacts were negligible. But the technical failure was complete. A reactor designed to demonstrate Swiss nuclear competence instead proved the dangers of experimental technology operated without adequate oversight. Contemporary nuclear plants incorporate lessons learned from Lucens. Multiple backup cooling systems prevent single-point failures. Computer monitoring detects anomalies immediately. Regulatory oversight requires conservative operation and immediate response to any abnormality. The water seal failures that destroyed the Lucens reactor would trigger automatic shutdown in modern facilities. Switzerland has moved beyond nuclear power. The government plans to phase out all nuclear reactors by 2050. Solar panels and wind turbines are replacing atomic energy. The country that once dreamed of nuclear independence now pursues renewable energy, self-sufficiency. Andreas Fritzsche's investigation revealed uncomfortable truths about nuclear oversight in the 1960s. Regulatory authority was fragmented. Safety systems were inadequate, warning signs were ignored. His report recommended fundamental changes in nuclear regulation that influenced safety protocols worldwide. The investigator, who spent 10 years analyzing Switzerland's nuclear disaster, helped prevent similar accidents elsewhere. The radioactive waste from Lucens will remain dangerous for thousands of years. Tritium has a half-life of 12 years. Other isotopes will persist much longer. Switzerland must monitor and maintain the waste storage systems indefinitely. Nuclear accidents create permanent responsibilities. Today, the Lucens Valley appears tranquil. Farms and vineyards surround the former nuclear site. Children play in fields where radiation detectors once registered lethal levels. But underground, sealed in concrete and steel, reminders of January 21, 1969 remain. The political impact extends beyond Switzerland. The Lucens accident influenced nuclear regulation across Europe. Safety requirements became more stringent. Oversight procedures became more rigorous. One small reactor's failure shaped international nuclear policy for decades. Nuclear workers worldwide train for scenarios based on historical accidents. Lucens provides lessons in recognizing early warning signs and responding to equipment failures before they become catastrophic. The reactor, that was supposed to demonstrate Swiss engineering excellence, instead teaches humility about nuclear technology's risks. If you think we need to learn from these disasters to prevent future ones, consider subscribing and sharing this story. Every accident that gets forgotten is a lesson that might be repeated. Switzerland's nuclear experiment ended in failure, but the knowledge gained may prevent others from making the same mistakes. The underground cavern at Lucens reminds us that even the most carefully designed systems can fail when human judgment falters and nature intervenes. The atom demands respect. The consequences of forgetting that lesson remain buried beneath the Swiss countryside, slowly decaying but never truly gone. Some experiments leave permanent scars. Some failures echo through generations. The question isn't whether nuclear technology is safe. The question is whether we're wise enough to remember why safety matters when ambition and economics pressure us to take shortcuts. At Lucens, Switzerland learned that answer the hard way.